Welcome back, everybody. The last video we learned how to register a user, but we did not complete our registration according to best practices. And that is because we were storing the user's password as it was supplied by the user the straight value in our users table. And that obviously is horrible practice. If you can believe it, there are still companies that actually store your password um, in that same manner, which is really bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a method of being able to protect the password and store it in a different way. And so when it comes to trying to protect passwords, there are two different ways um, usually that are used, and one is encryption and one is hashing. And so, what's the difference between the two? So, encryption goes two ways. So, first, it utilizes plain text and then a private key to generate an encrypted password, and then it reverses the process to match to an original password. Whereas hashing is a cryptographic algorithm that only goes one way. So with parameters and input, it creates a hash. It's pure, and given the same parameters and input, it'll generate the same hash every time. So it's a beautiful one way, and then it's extremely difficult to break um, for hackers. And the library that we're going to use called bcrypt.js, not to be confused with bcrypt. So there's um, there's bcrypt and there's bcrypt.js. And bcrypt, the last I heard, it was not working well with Windows computers. But bcrypt.js still has no problems at all. So that's the library that we're going to use. Bcrypt.js, in order to mix up a hash value of a password, it'll throw in a value that's called a salt, which is a random value that it keeps track of and it knows, and it'll add that value to the hash. And so why that's important is, let's say I have a password called orange and someone else creates a password called orange. Well, our hashed versions of those very same words will come out to two completely different values using the bcrypt library, because of this salt value. And then on top of the salt value um, is uh, is something called a round. And a round is it'll it'll hash the password, and then it'll rehash the hash, and then rehash the hash again and again and again and again. And for instance, let's say you have like 6 rounds. Well, it doesn't hash it 6 times; it's 2 to the 6 times. So it rehashes over and over and over and over and over. So it's very safe, and it's very extremely difficult for hackers to try to tear apart. One of the one of the methods that hackers use to sort of try to break apart a hashed password is something called it's a brute force attack. It's called that, and what they do is they'll um, they'll try to pre-calculate hashes for like all possible character combinations up to a particular length using these libraries, and then they'll take the result of these calculations and they'll store them into what's called rainbow tables. And then so whenever there's a breach, then they're going to check every breached password against their table. And so with bcrypt using rounds where it rehashes a password. So for instance, I typically use 12 rounds or more whenever I hash a password. And so it's going to rehash the password 2 to the 12th times. So it's extremely safe. Okay, a lot of words. Let's get to coding. So let's first install the package. So I'm going to do yarn add bcrypt.js. once again, not bcrypt by itself. This will work, I believe, for Mac users, but don't quote me. But Windows users will run into problems. So bcrypt.js and hit enter. All right. And now we have to bring it into where we're going to use it. We're going to use it in our route, in our user route. So let's say const bcrypt equals require bcrypt.js. Here it is. So, I just got done saying it's not bcrypt, but bcrypt.js. But, for those of you that don't know, you can name this variable anything you want. So we have our endpoint, and we're first checking to make sure that they've entered both a username and a password before we try to do anything. So before we add the user and store them, before we do this add user function, what we're going to do is we're going to take their password, hash it, and replace the password with the hashed version of it. And this is how we do it. So first of all, we create a constant called hash. So const hash. And then what it's going to do is it's going to use a bcrypt method. So equals bcrypt dot hash sync. And then it takes two arguments. It takes the password that you want to hash. So we'll say credentials.password. And then it takes, remember I talked about how many rounds that's gonna, how many 2 to the power of what do you want it to rehash over and over and over. And so I'm gonna enter 12. I think I read an article a while back where a security expert said that anything less than 12 rounds, that he didn't think it was as safe. So 12 rounds is plenty, and also it doesn't take that long. So so what this line right here does is it takes their password that they've entered, it submits it to, and it rehashes it 2 to the 12 times, and it's going to store then that final result into this variable called hash. And then all we simply now are going to do is replace this with their password. So now we just say credentials.password equals hash. So they entered 1, 2, 3, 4 PASS, and we hashed it 2 to the 12 times, created some long hash string, and now we're going to store that hashed password in our tables. And then the rest of the code will work fine. So let's save this, and let's start our server up, yarn server, and let's go add a user. So let's go to register. Let's enter like Martha, and let's say her password is 1, 2, 3, 4 pass. We'll hit send. All right, so it added Martha. Let's go find all users, and there we go, Martha. So what it did is she entered 1, 2, 3, 4 PASS, and it stored this as her password. Let me show you how another user can use this very same password and the values will be different. So let's enter Ethan, 1, 2, 3, 4 pass. All right, it added Ethan. Now let's go look. And so look at Ethan and Martha have the same password, but look at their hashed values are different. Just different strings, different values altogether. So the library is very, very safe. So that's how we store a hash value in place of a password. But this would be useless if we didn't know how to use it on a login endpoint. So let's write a quick login endpoint, and then I'll show you how the library uses that to rehash it and check a login. So let's scroll up here, and let's write a login endpoint. Router.post. It's a post because we're sending information again, and we're gonna call this the endpoint login, and rec res. And so let's deconstruct our rec.body into username and password equals rec.body. And we should probably check and make sure that they've entered both. So we'll copy this code because that code nicely does that. We can paste that code right here. So this little code makes sure that they've entered both. And now what we can do is we can write our endpoint. So we can say, so now what we want to do is we want to look in our users table, and first, before we do anything, just see if we have a username in our users table by this name. So we want to check both the username and a password. And so first we want to say lessons dot, and what's our helper? What's our helper for finding a user? Here it is, find user by username. I'm going to copy that. So lessons dot find user by username, and I'm going to pass in this username that we deconstructed because that's what the helper file is looking for right here. It's looking for a username. And so I'm going to pass in a username, and then what I'm going to do, find all, pass in that, and then I'm going to say dot then, if it finds a user with that username, then it's going to return back to us a user object. And with that user object, we will have access to the password, right? Because it's going to return back to us the first record it comes by that in the users table. In the users table, we will have access to their stored password, that long hashed value. And so now we can say if user, in other words, if we got a user back, and this is where the bcrypt library compares what he entered, he or she entered 1234 PASS, and it's going to compare it against a hashed version of that. So we say bcrypt dot, and instead of hash sync, this one's compare sync with a capital S, and it takes two arguments. It takes the password that is being input in the object, so password, and then it's going to compare it. It's going to hash this and compare the hash of this to the hashed value that we have stored in our table at user.password. So it's going to take this password and it's going to hash it and then compare it and say, hey, if I hash this password, it should equal exactly the same as what I have stored for your hashed password. And if that passes, then we can allow them to log in or do whatever. So we can say res.status 200.json with a message. Let's use string interpolation with the backticks to the left of the number one key. I'll say welcome user.username, maybe with an exclamation point. Else, then we know that they did not enter good information. So we say res.status, and the proper status code is 401.json with a message of invalid credentials. And then, of course, we have to have a catch in case it didn't find this, in case there was an error or it couldn't find this username in the database at all. So let's see. In case there was an error with that, we'll say dot catch error, and then we'll say res.status of 500 .json, and we'll just pass the error into the JSON. That'll be good for the developer. Let's hit save. Now let's go test our login endpoint. So we had Ethan with 1234 PASS. I've created a login endpoint here. It's basically going to be the same endpoint as our register, but instead of the register word, we're going to use login word. So login, you see here logger, login, and let's say Ethan with 1234 pass. Invalid credentials. Oh, Ethan. See, I misspelled his name. So this is good. It shows that if the name doesn't match, it's not going to. So let's do AN. And I think that that's it. Let's see. Let's make sure. Let's try to log in with who was find all users. Send. We have Martha. Martha. Let's try to log in with Martha. Log in. Username. Martha. 11234 pass. 500 internal server error. Huh. Wonder what's going on there. Let's check it out. It's not finding those users by the username. Oh, no, the server's running. Is it running? Let's stop the server. Let's restart the server. Yarn server. Let's just check this out. Let's just look for any code errors. Router.post, login, username, if not username and password. Find user by username. It's passing the username. Then user. If user and bcrypt. Oh, compare sync. Ah! I misspelled it. It's compare sync. It has to be with a Y. Compare sync. Let's save that. Notice there was something going on goofy with that. All right, now let's check out. Let's try to log in here. Let's try to log in with Martha. Let me see, log in. Welcome, Martha. Now let's misspell her name. Invalid credentials. Let's spell her name right, but do her password wrong. Invalid credentials. Let's try to log in with Ethan. Beautiful. All right. Sorry about that little goof up. Yeah. Code is particular like that, isn't it? It's you have to spell things right. But so now we have created now best practices with using a very popular library that is well supported. If there's ever any problems with bcrypt.js, the user community gives it instant support, and so it's a very popular library, and it's used by a lot of developers. And so we have a register endpoint now, and we have a login endpoint. Wow. In the next video, when we log in, if we were to switch screens or go away and come back, then we would lose the login. You'd have to log in again, and that is horrible user experience. And so we have to start talking about how we make a login, session persist. And so there's two different ways that's normally done. One with cookies, and then another way with JSON web tokens. So we're going to be doing those in the next couple videos. Thank you for joining me. And as always, if you have any comments or need help, please post them in the YouTube conversation thread, and I will get back to you. Thank you.